Welcome to Paranormal Pages. Please drop a like or comment if you want to help the channel. Now let's get into the true scary stories. The forgotten tape. The videotape was old and unlabeled, a dusty relic I'd found tucked inside a shoebox in my late grandmother's attic. It looked worn, like it had been handled often, yet never discarded, as if someone knew that one day it would be watched. My thumb traced over the cracked plastic as I held it up to the light. I didn't recognize the tape, yet something about it felt familiar in that strange, unplaceable way that you recognize a face from a long-forgotten dream. There was a dark curiosity pulling me towards it, a whisper at the back of my mind urging me to remember. I borrowed a friend's ancient VCR and settled in my living room, feeling a strange mix of nostalgia and trepidation. The whir of the machine as it took the tape brought with it a flood of memories. I was 7 years old again, surrounded by cake and balloons. Friends and family crowded into our small backyard, laughter echoing off the trees. But as the grainy footage flickered to life on my screen, I was surprised to see myself as a child on that very day, a birthday I had somehow forgotten. In the footage, the camera zoomed in on my face as I laughed and stumbled around with my cousins. My mother's voice, warm and gentle, narrated the day, describing each child by name, recounting the party games and antics. Everything seemed so familiar, almost comforting. But then I noticed it, a face pressed against the window in the background, faint but distinct, wearing a clown mask with hollow eyes. I froze. The face was partially hidden by the window's reflection, but the mask's features, the crude, hand-painted smile, the faded yellowish tint of the plastic, sent a chill down my spine. I hadn't remembered any clowns at that birthday, let alone someone outside, standing so still and staring in, unnoticed by everyone else. The tape went on, my mother's voice jovial as the camera cut to each guest. I was a little boy, oblivious to the figure lurking just feet away, separated only by a thin pane of glass. I felt a shiver crawl up my spine, the kind of primal fear you feel in a nightmare, when you know something terrible is just out of sight. But it was more than that. I could sense the presence of that figure in the room with me now, hovering on the edge of memory, a detail lost to time that was now creeping back into view. Who is that? I murmured, the question escaping before I realized I'd said it out loud. My voice cracked as the footage flickered, cutting in and out. My fingers gripped the edges of the couch, and I found myself leaning forward, as if I could somehow reach through the screen and pull that memory closer. As I did, the clown turned, its hollow eyes staring directly at the camera. The image fizzled, distorting, as if it was reacting to my gaze. With a crackle, the tape froze on the clown's face, its empty black eyes staring directly at me. I could almost hear it breathing. There was something so menacing, so calculated in that expression, an unnatural patience, as though it had been waiting for years, waiting for me to remember. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, that clown mask crept into my thoughts, its hollow eyes fixed on me as if watching from across time. By morning, I convinced myself it was just a trick of the tape. Maybe a neighbor had worn the mask as a joke, some harmless prank that I'd forgotten. I wanted to believe that, but an uneasy feeling gnawed at me. There was something wrong about the way the clown had stared, too intense, too aware. The next evening, I couldn't resist. I played the tape again, searching for any other signs of that masked figure. The birthday scene unfolded as it had before, laughter and the squeals of children filling the screen, my mother's voice carrying on about presents and games. Then, the familiar chill crept up my spine. The clown was back in the window. But this time it wasn't just watching. I could swear it was moving, shifting almost imperceptibly closer to the glass. I leaned closer to the screen, feeling the hair on my arms rise as the figure's face sharpened in focus. The edges of the clown mask seemed blurred, almost as if it were melting, its colors bleeding faintly into the background. The mouth, once a simple painted smile, seemed wider this time, almost as if it were stretching. And then, in a low, raspy whisper that was barely audible over the laughter of the children, I thought I heard it. Remember me. I jerked back from the screen, heart pounding. The room felt suddenly colder, shadows stretching across the walls in the dim light. My hands shook as I rewound the tape, but when I played it again, There was nothing out of the ordinary. No whisper, no distorted smile. Just a group of happy children, oblivious to the shadowed figure in the background. But I knew what I'd seen and what I'd heard. The next day, I tried to bring it up with my mother. I was cautious, unsure of how to phrase it. "Hey, Mom, do you remember my 7th birthday?" I asked, keeping my voice casual, though my heart was racing. She hesitated, a distant look crossing her face. "Oh yes, that was the one in the backyard, wasn't it?" she murmured, though her tone was uncertain. "It's strange, though. I remember everyone being there, but I do feel like I've forgotten some parts of it." "Do you remember anyone unusual there?" I asked, barely daring to breathe. "Like a clown or someone outside the window?" She went silent, a frown forming as her eyes drifted toward a memory she couldn't quite grasp. "A clown?" she repeated slowly, her expression darkening. "No, I don't think so. Why do you ask?" The words caught in my throat. I knew it would sound ridiculous, crazy even, and the last thing I wanted was for her to worry. So I shook my head and forced a laugh. "Just curious. Maybe I'm mixing it up with something else." That night, I couldn't resist watching the tape again. I felt a strange compulsion, an unexplainable pull that was stronger than my fear. As the scenes played out once more, I braced myself for the familiar face at the window, my pulse quickening as I waited for it to appear. But something had changed. This time, the clown wasn't just in the window. It was standing right behind my 7-year-old self, almost close enough to touch me. I gasped, my eyes widening as the child version of me turned around on screen, looking directly at the figure. The clown didn't move, but something about its posture, its proximity, seemed threatening, as though it had somehow crossed the boundary between spectator and intruder. I was struck by a terrible feeling, a twisted intuition that this wasn't just an ordinary person in a mask. And then, as my past self stared, the clown lifted a gloved finger to its lips, a sinister shh gesture that chilled me to the bone. The screen crackled, the image distorting and fading out as though whatever held it together was losing control. The tape froze on the clown's distorted face, flickering as the screen darkened, leaving the room silent and me breathless, unable to move. I didn't sleep that night. Every sound in my apartment seemed amplified. The hum of the refrigerator, the creak of floorboards settling, the soft tap of branches against the window. It all felt as if it was closing in on me, pressing me to watch the tape again. Yet I couldn't bring myself to face it, not after seeing that grotesque figure creeping closer to me as a child, his finger held to his lips like a warning. In the morning, I decided to dig a little deeper. My memory was hazy about that time in my life, almost as if I'd blocked it out. I searched through old photos, hoping to find some trace of that birthday, some evidence that could explain who that man in the clown mask was. But all I found were the usual pictures of relatives, neighbors, family friends. No one in a mask, no one even remotely resembling that strange figure. Growing frustrated, I decided to pay a visit to my childhood friend, Oliver. He'd been there that day. He was the kid with the terrible haircut and the blue balloon tied to his wrist. We'd lost touch over the years, but I found his contact information easily enough. When I reached out, he sounded surprised but happy to hear from me, and we agreed to meet at a small diner that afternoon. I didn't tell him the real reason I wanted to see him. When Oliver arrived, we exchanged pleasantries, laughing over shared memories and catching up on life. But soon enough, I steered the conversation toward that birthday. "Do you remember my 7th birthday?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "It was in the backyard, lots of kids running around." He laughed, nodding. "Yeah, I remember. I was jealous of that big cake. Your mom always went all out with the decorations, too, and that creepy balloon art she made." I hesitated, my heart pounding. "Do you remember anyone else being there? Like a clown, maybe?" His face fell, and he grew uncharacteristically quiet. For a moment, he just stared at me, a flicker of something dark in his eyes. "Funny you should ask that," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "I always thought I imagined it. But yeah, I remember someone in a clown mask. I thought it was a prank, or maybe your uncle messing with us. But I remember." He paused, his voice trailing off as he stared into his coffee. "Remember what?" I pressed, my own voice barely steady. He swallowed hard. "I remember him standing outside the window watching us. And then, at some point, he wasn't outside anymore. He was inside, behind you. Oliver's face had turned pale. I remember the way he looked at you. It was like he knew you, like he was waiting for you to notice him. A chill ran through me. I opened my mouth to ask more, but Oliver shook his head, standing abruptly. Look, I don't want to talk about this anymore. It's creeping me out. Maybe it was just some weird neighbor. I don't know. He threw some bills on the table and gave me a strained look. Just forget it, okay? Some things are better left buried. After he left, I sat alone, reeling from his words. Someone else had seen it, the clown. He'd been real. I wasn't imagining this. I couldn't shake the sensation that somehow, whatever it was, he had left a piece of himself in me. A shadow that had waited years for me to look back. Back home, I couldn't resist any longer. I had to see the tape again, had to face the truth. I pressed play, my hands trembling. The scenes played out as before, children laughing, my younger self oblivious to the figure that had haunted my nightmares since I'd found the tape. But now, something had changed. The man wasn't just a background figure anymore. He was inside the house, sitting quietly in a chair, watching me. I felt my blood run cold as I realized he was looking directly into the camera, his hollow, painted eyes holding a familiar intensity. I had seen those eyes before, an old photograph in my grandmother's album, one she'd told me never to look at again. The clown lifted his hand and pointed forward, and it felt as though he were pointing directly at me through the screen. The tape crackled, the picture distorting as his painted mouth twisted into an open-mouthed grin. And then, in a voice that sent a jolt of terror straight through me, he rasped, "You remembered." The screen went dark, leaving me in silence, the room suddenly heavy with his presence. After that night, I couldn't escape him. Shadows in my apartment felt heavier, like they were crowding around me, closing in. I stopped sleeping, too terrified that I'd find him waiting if I dared close my eyes. Even in daylight, I sensed him lurking at the edges of my vision, just out of reach, waiting. The words echoed in my head, "You remembered," but I still didn't understand. I didn't know who he was or why he had waited, silent and patient, for me to uncover him. I spent hours digging through my grandmother's things, trying to find any connection, any clue to this faceless figure who had haunted my childhood and slipped, unnoticed, into my memory. Finally, buried in a stack of dusty photo albums, I found it. An old, weathered photograph of a young boy, standing next to a man with his arm around my shoulders, both of us smiling. And there it was. He wore the same clown mask, grinning with those hollow, staring eyes. But the figure behind the mask wasn't a stranger. A terrible realization washed over me as I stared at his hand on my shoulder, his grip a bit too tight, his smile slightly strained. My grandmother had never spoken of him, never mentioned that I even had an uncle. But in the back of my mind, the memories began to uncoil, dark and twisted. I remembered sitting beside him, listening to his low voice telling strange stories, promising me that he would never, ever leave. The photo slipped from my fingers, fluttering to the floor. The memories resurfaced, violent and sharp. Glimpses of my 7th birthday, of him appearing at the edge of the yard, his eyes locked on me, a silent promise of something I couldn't yet understand. My family had moved suddenly after that birthday. They'd said he was gone, but they never told me why. I stumbled back to the living room, knowing what I had to do. The tape waited, taunting me from the VCR. With shaking hands, I pressed play one final time. As the tape rolled, I waited, heart pounding, for the moment he would appear. This time, he didn't just linger in the background or hover at the edges. He moved freely through the crowd of children, brushing past them as if they weren't even there, his eyes focused only on me. Then, as if he sensed my gaze, he stopped and looked directly into the camera. His voice drifted through the static, low and hollow. "I told you I'd be back. You forgot me, but I never forgot you." I watched, frozen, as my younger self looked over at him, the confusion and fear flashing across my young face. My skin prickled with cold as I realized what he was doing. He wasn't haunting the tape. He was coming back. I could feel him, his presence thickening in the room, pressing down on me with a darkness that filled every corner, every crevice. The screen went black, and in the silence that followed, I heard a soft, rasping laugh right behind me. Hey, subscribe for more true scary stories. Story 2. The frosted warning. The first time I noticed the frost, it was barely a feathered edge on the inside of my bedroom window. It had been a bitterly cold night, one of the earliest of the season, and I remember thinking that perhaps the old house was simply not ready for the plunge into winter. But as I drew closer to the glass, the frost was wrong. Each icy line etched against the pane seemed deliberate, like brushstrokes from a careful hand. The sight gave me a shiver, one I dismissed as a reaction to the chilly room, though somewhere deeper, I knew it was something more. When I traced my finger along the inside of the frosted letters, because that's what they were, letters, I felt a disturbing, unnatural chill sink into my bones. The word leave melted quickly under the heat of my touch, leaving me staring at nothing but the night beyond. I took a step back, heart racing. Who would write that, and why? I lived alone, for God's sake. The house had been in my family for generations, empty and unclaimed, until I decided to move in after my grandmother's death. She'd been the last to live here, and when she passed, I assumed the house would be nothing more than a historical relic, full of fading memories. I couldn't have been more wrong. Over the following days, the frost continued to reappear, always around midnight, and always with that same word in its thin, jagged lines, leave. The message seemed to hover there just long enough to catch my eye before dissolving back into the night. I tried convincing myself it was a trick of condensation or cold air hitting warm surfaces in some unusual way. But then, one night, the frost spelled out something else. Danger. It was unmistakable, as if whoever, whatever, was behind this wanted no room for doubt. I began dreading the arrival of night, staring at the windows from across the room, waiting for the frost to creep up again. Each evening it was the same, whispering on the glass, a chill settling in the room even when the heat was on full blast. I spoke to myself, this is ridiculous. It's just ice, a reaction to the weather. But deep down, I wasn't sure. I could feel it, a presence, something older than I could comprehend, watching, lurking. And as much as I told myself it was just a quirk of an aging house, the feeling gnawed at my mind. One night, desperate for sleep and answers, I decided to stay up until I saw the frost form. I sat on my bed, facing the window, the house unnervingly silent around me. Midnight came and went. A gust of icy wind rattled the walls, then faded. I shivered and reached for my sweater, but it wasn't enough to chase away the cold that seemed to deepen, crawling into my bones. And then, slowly, like invisible fingers pressing against the glass, the frost formed again. But this time it spelled something new. Listen. I leaned forward, heart pounding, a primal fear clawing up my throat. Listen, I whispered, watching my breath fog the air. And that's when I heard it, a soft, barely perceptible scratching sound coming from the walls themselves, as if something had just woken up. That night, I lay rigid in bed, listening to the scratching grow louder, steady as a heartbeat. Every scrape seemed to echo through the room, each one piercing the dark silence. I didn't dare move, didn't even breathe, as though any sound I made would reveal me to whatever was lurking just beyond my sight. I told myself it was rats or maybe tree branches scraping against the walls, but in truth, I knew this wasn't something so explainable. I'd lived here for months, and the house had never made sounds like this before. Then the scratching stopped, and a new sound took its place. A faint, wet whisper, just loud enough to send chills down my spine. It sounded like someone breathing, labored and shallow, muffled by the walls. I sat up, the hairs on my arms standing on end, and stared at the window. The frost was back, thick this time, spelling out words with eerie clarity. "Do you hear me?" it asked. I felt a flash of anger mixed with fear. "Yes," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I wasn't even sure who or what I was answering, but the words tumbled out before I could stop myself. The moment I spoke, the whispering turned to a low, chilling moan, echoing from all around me. It filled the room, a hollow, aching sound that pulled at something primal inside of me. The air grew colder, and my breath came out in foggy puffs as I glanced around, desperately searching for a source. But there was nothing, just the silence pressing back in after the moan faded, leaving only the frost, waiting. The next morning, exhausted and rattled, I tried to make sense of it all. I called a friend, Evie, who'd always been intrigued by the paranormal. She was the kind of person who spent weekends at supposedly haunted inns and collected obscure books on occult subjects. "I've been seeing words written in frost on my windows," I told her, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice. "And last night, there was something scratching in the walls. I heard it." There was a long pause before she spoke. "It sounds like something is trying to communicate with you. Have you done anything to reach out?" I scoffed at the idea, but Evie pressed. "The house might be harboring old spirits, family secrets or regrets. Sometimes they linger, sometimes they get restless." That evening, with Evie's warning weighing on my mind, I stood in front of the frosted window and whispered, "What do you want from me?" I felt ridiculous, but somehow it felt right, like the question had been waiting to be asked. The frost appeared almost immediately, as though it had been listening, poised to answer. This time it was a single word, help. My blood turned to ice. What did it want help with? Who was asking? As I stared at the word, a vision crept into my mind, a flash of something unfamiliar yet intimate. It was my grandmother's face, as I remembered her from when I was a child, worn but kind. She was whispering to me, her eyes clouded with something I couldn't place. "Stay away from the basement," she told me, her voice a faint warning in my memory. The frost dissolved before I could reach out, leaving the word help echoing in my mind. I was left standing alone, my thoughts circling around a place I'd never dared go. There was only one answer left, and it chilled me to my core. I had to go down into the basement. The stairs to the basement were steep and narrow, the wood worn and creaking under my feet. A damp chill hung in the air, growing colder as I descended. Each step seemed to pull me further from the warmth of the living world, and a creeping dread clawed at my mind. A single dim light bulb dangled from the ceiling, casting ghostly shadows that danced across the walls. I wanted to turn back, to pretend I hadn't seen that frost-written message at all, but some force stronger than fear kept pushing me forward. Halfway down, I heard the scratching again, soft and relentless, coming from somewhere below. The basement smelled of mildew and something else, something metallic and sharp, like rust or blood. I hesitated, heart pounding, before reaching for the string hanging from the ceiling bulb. I pulled it, and a weak, sickly light sputtered to life, barely illuminating the basement's stone walls and cracked floor. At first glance, the basement looked just as it always had. Boxes piled in corners, forgotten furniture draped in old sheets, and shelves lined with dusty jars and old tools. But there was a spot near the far wall where the light didn't quite reach, and the shadows seemed thicker, darker. And there, just beyond the edge of the light, I could make out something strange, a shape that didn't belong. I took a deep breath, summoning the last of my courage, and stepped closer. It was a door. Not just any door, though. This was made of heavy wood, banded in iron, and it looked far older than anything else in the house. It was locked with a thick, rusty padlock that seemed to breathe a menace of its own, a warning embedded in the metal. The scratching noise was louder now, more insistent, like claws on the other side trying to get out, or something trying to lure me in. For a moment, I just stared at it, feeling the cold seep through my skin, clutching at my bones. That door hadn't been there before. I was sure of it. I reached out, my hand trembling as I gripped the padlock. It was frigid to the touch, and as I held it, frost bloomed along the surface, creeping over my fingers. I gasped and pulled my hand back, watching in horror as frost curled across my skin, spelling out letters in thin, sharp strokes. "Set me free." The words lingered for just a moment before melting away, but their impression burned into my mind. I turned to leave, but the scratching grew desperate, louder, until it felt like it was coming from inside my skull. The message was clear. Whatever was on the other side wasn't going to stop. Summoning what little courage I had left, I grabbed a crowbar from one of the shelves. With a grunt, I wedged it between the lock and the door, prying and heaving until finally, with a sharp crack, the padlock broke open. My heart raced as I pulled the door open, half expecting something monstrous to leap out. But the space beyond was empty, shrouded in darkness and thick, icy air that rolled out like a fog. I peered inside, squinting to make out anything beyond the first few feet, but all I saw were vague shapes cloaked in shadows. I stepped forward, the floor beneath my feet cold and damp. Then I heard it, a voice, faint but distinct, whispering my name. James. It was a woman's voice, one I hadn't heard in years. It was my grandmother's voice. "Grandma," I called, my voice trembling as it echoed into the dark. The whisper came again, but this time it was softer, a plea. "Please, help me." My breath caught in my throat as I moved deeper into the room, following the voice. But as I took another step, the door behind me slammed shut with a force that rattled the walls. I whipped around, heart pounding, and reached for the door handle, but it wouldn't budge. I was trapped. And then, from the depths of the darkness, came a final message, hissing through the cold. "You shouldn't have come." Panic surged through me as I clawed at the door, desperate to get out, but the handle stayed locked, unmoved by my frantic yanking. The darkness closed in, colder and heavier, pressing against my skin like a shroud. My breath came out in short, foggy puffs, mingling with a damp, suffocating chill that seeped into my bones. Behind me, that whisper, the one that sounded like my grandmother, echoed through the pitch-black room. Only this time it was no plea, it was a warning. "You should not have come." The words hung in the air, thick with sorrow and anger, twisting around me in the dark. My back pressed against the door, my fingers scraping the cold wood, but escape was no longer an option. I forced myself to steady my breathing, trying to make sense of my surroundings. A faint blue glow emerged in the dark, illuminating the walls covered in frost that pulsed and shifted, forming words. They seemed to flicker in and out of view, each letter moving like they were alive. "Return what you took," they spelled, the letters jagged and urgent. "Release me." My mind raced, trying to understand what it could mean. What had I taken? The only things I'd taken were memories, fragments of stories my grandmother told me about the house, this strange family relic. I had no idea what the house could possibly want back. As I stood there, shivering in the chill, I realized that I was hearing the scratching again, but this time it was coming from within the walls, all around me. Scratching, clawing, like something desperate, something trying to break free. And then that voice, my grandmother's voice, spoke one final time, and it was laced with a terror I had never heard in her before. "The mirror, James. Break the mirror before it takes you." Heart pounding, I stumbled back, the message as clear as the frost-covered letters on the wall. There, in the center of the room, stood an antique mirror, its frame twisted with dark, spidery vines of iron that looked like they were growing from the glass itself. The surface was clouded, but as I approached, something moved within it. My reflection stared back at me, its eyes hollow, its mouth twisted into a grotesque grin. I recoiled, realizing that it wasn't just a reflection. It was something else entirely, something trapped behind the glass, mimicking me. The scratching grew louder, more frenzied, and suddenly faces began to emerge from the mirror's surface, pressing against it from within. Their eyes were empty, their mouths open in silent screams. And there among them was my grandmother, her face distorted with fear, her hand reaching out as if trying to grab me. I felt the pull of the mirror, an invisible force dragging me toward it, growing stronger with every second. With a strangled cry, I reached for a jagged piece of the broken padlock and hurled it at the mirror, shattering the surface into 1,000 shards. The faces vanished in an instant, their anguished expressions frozen in the splinters of glass scattered across the floor. A bone-chilling wail filled the room, and a force like a gust of icy wind knocked me to the ground. The door flew open, and the darkness began to recede, the oppressive cold lifting. Shaken and gasping, I stumbled back up the stairs, my body heavy and numb. The house was silent, as though whatever had lingered there was finally gone, freed by the broken mirror. I stood in my bedroom, exhausted and shaken, staring at the morning light streaming through the window. But as I turned, I caught sight of the mirror's reflection, whole and intact, hanging behind me on the wall, its surface smooth and dark. And from the shadows within, a familiar face looked out, my own. To this day, every night I see him, the other me, grinning from the mirror, waiting for his turn. Hey, subscribe for more true scary stories. Story 3, The Gathering Eyes. The first night it happened, I thought it was a dream. I'd woken to a faint scratching, so quiet I might have ignored it, if not for the long, drawn-out sound. My bedroom window overlooked the street, and I'd seen plenty of strays around, skittering through the neighborhood like ghosts with gleaming eyes. It was typical enough to see a pair or two lingering by my house, but that night was different. I turned over to the soft glow from the street lamp and nearly gasped. There, just beyond my window, were at least 10 pairs of eyes, all of them fixed directly on me. My first thought was that I must be mistaken. No way were that many cats just staring. I rubbed my eyes, hoping they'd vanish, but no. Their shapes grew clearer, a sea of sleek fur and shifting tails. Their eyes shone with an eerie greenish light as they blinked, almost in sync, watching me with unsettling patience. I shivered, feeling as though I were the one on display, a mouse caught in a silent trap. My heart drummed hard in my chest, and I pulled the covers up, trying to convince myself they'd be gone by morning. But morning came, and even as dawn painted the sky in muted pinks and yellows, they remained. They were quiet, unmoving, and as I approached my door, I could see the strain of waiting in their narrowed, hungry eyes. That was when I noticed something else. They weren't just looking at me. Their heads were slightly tilted, ears perked as if listening to some distant, soundless call. I opened the door, and just like that, they scattered, slipping into bushes and between fences like shadows. A chill prickled up my spine, and I watched until the last of them was gone. I spent the rest of that day feeling absurdly haunted, replaying the memory of their unblinking stares, and yet I somehow convinced myself it had just been one of those odd passing moments. Maybe they were drawn to my house for food. Perhaps a neighbor had left something out. But as night fell, a feeling of dread crept in, persistent as a pulse beneath my skin. I paced in front of my window, determined not to give in to any irrational fears, when the scratching began again. Soft, rhythmic, as if toying with me. Against my better judgment, I peeked outside. There they were. Twice as many as the night before. Rows and rows of cats, every one of them watching, waiting. Their tails twitched, their bodies were taut with a strange anticipation. But this time, they weren't the only ones. Among the cats was a dark figure, a hunched shape with bony, outstretched hands, its body hidden beneath a cloak of shadows. I squinted, trying to make sense of it, but a chill surged through me, pinning me where I stood. One of the cats let out a low, almost guttural hiss, and the shadow shifted, raising a skeletal hand toward me. I stumbled backward, the sense of being watched by something far older, far darker than any animal clinging to me like a second skin. I staggered to the living room, grabbing my phone and dialing without thinking. As I waited for the line to connect, my fingers trembled. The image of that cloaked figure burned into my mind. The call rang out into the silence, each unanswered tone amplifying my fear. No one answered. I was alone, utterly alone, with only the hungry eyes of the cats and that dark presence outside. That night, I barely slept. Every creak of the house, every whisper of wind seemed laced with malice. And at the stroke of midnight, the scratching returned, louder, more insistent. I dared not look, knowing that whatever waited out there wasn't just a stray animal anymore. I forced myself to stay awake as long as I could, huddled in my living room, gripping an old baseball bat I'd dug out from the garage. I kept every light on, knowing it was ridiculous, but feeling safer in the glow. Midnight came, then passed, and for a while, there was nothing, only the soft hum of my refrigerator, the buzz of the clock ticking its way through the dark hours. It lulled me into a false sense of security, and just as I began to drift into a restless sleep, the scratching returned, scraping against my senses like a jagged nail on glass. This time, it came from the front door. I held my breath, straining to listen, and the faintest sound of murmuring came through, like whispers carried on a draft. As I crept closer, the whispering grew louder, though I couldn't make out any words, only a chorus of sounds that sent shivers down my spine. I peered through the peephole, half dreading what I might see, and felt my blood freeze. There, huddled in the dimness, was the cloaked figure again, and surrounding it were the cats, dozens of them now, all watching, waiting. Who's there? My voice trembled, barely a whisper, but I couldn't stop myself from asking. The murmuring paused as if the figure heard me, and slowly it lifted its head. Even through the distorted glass, I could feel the weight of its gaze, deep and penetrating. Its face was hidden in shadow, yet I sensed something profoundly old and hungry lurking beneath the hood. A cold dread gripped me as the figure tilted its head, its mouth opening slightly to speak. "Not yet," it said, the voice deep and gravelly, sending ice through my veins. "Soon." I backed away, heart racing, and locked the door, as if that simple act could keep it at bay. Desperate, I fumbled for my phone, but the reception was gone. Every call, every text failed to go through. The house seemed to tighten around me, trapping me in its silence as the whispers resumed outside, echoing like the low, eerie chanting of a long-forgotten ritual. The cat's eyes glowed through the windows, their stares piercing and relentless, as if they were waiting for me to give in, to open the door. The hours stretched painfully, my every nerve on edge, but eventually dawn broke, and with it, a strange silence fell. I dared to peek outside only to find the yard empty, the street as ordinary as it had always been. My neighbor, old Mrs. Grayson, was out watering her plants, humming as if nothing had happened. I almost ran out to her, desperate for some human contact, but the absurdity of my own story held me back. I wasn't about to frighten an old woman with tales of ghostly visitors and chanting cats. As the day dragged on, I convinced myself again that it had to be some trick of my imagination. But by evening, the fear returned, settling into my bones. This time, I decided to prepare. I set up an old camera by the front door and another by the window, hoping to capture some evidence of what I'd seen. Midnight crept closer, and with every tick of the clock, my heart pounded louder, as if it were counting down to some inevitable doom. Then, right on cue, the scratching began. I flipped on my monitors, my eyes glued to the grainy feed. The cats were there, their forms shifting in and out of focus, shadows crawling around them like living tendrils. And there, in the middle of the swarm, stood the figure, closer than before, its eyes glowing faintly beneath the hood. I watched as it lifted a skeletal hand pointing directly at the camera. My screen flickered, and for a split second, I saw something etched in shadows. A word, faint but unmistakable, burned into the screen in an unnatural, twisted script. "Tonight," it read. I gasped, stumbling backward as the lights flickered. I could hear the faint, chilling chant through the walls again, louder this time, and somehow, impossibly, I understood the words. They were calling my name. I stumbled back from the monitors, my heartbeat hammering in my chest. The word "tonight" burned into my mind, like a curse I couldn't shake. Every instinct screamed to flee, to drive far away and never look back, but I was frozen. I watched, helpless, as the scratching grew louder, every scrape against the door echoing with grim finality. The chanting outside intensified, my name threading through the voices in a low, haunting hum that seemed to vibrate through the walls, filling the house with a deep, resonant dread. Then, without warning, the front door rattled as if someone was testing the handle. "Let us in," a voice whispered, soft but dripping with malice. I backed into the kitchen, gripping the countertop until my knuckles turned white. I wasn't sure if they were talking to me or to the cats, but the pull was unmistakable. Something wanted in. No, something wanted me. Desperation made me reckless. I snatched the salt shaker and spilled a line across the front door, my mind grasping at any fragment of old lore I'd heard about warding off spirits. I placed a cross from my grandmother's jewelry box on the windowsill, hoping that somehow it might shield me. Outside, the shadows shifted, and I heard a guttural hiss. The cloaked figure leaned closer to the door, tilting its head as if it could see me cowering just on the other side. "Why are you doing this?" I yelled, my voice breaking. The figure's laugh was low and drawn out, a rasping sound that made my skin crawl. "Because," it replied, voice like dry leaves rustling in a forgotten graveyard, "you called us here." I froze, my mind racing. Called them? I had done no such thing, yet there was a strange familiarity in the figure's words, a sense that it knew me in ways I couldn't comprehend. As I tried to process its meaning, the cats began to scratch at the windows, their claws tapping a slow, rhythmic beat that echoed the figure's words. My stomach twisted as the realization dawned. They had been waiting for me, long before I ever noticed them. They had been watching, their eyes like tiny lanterns, guiding this dark presence closer with every midnight gathering. Suddenly the lights flickered, casting the room in a dim, ghostly glow. The figure's shadow stretched through the keyhole, spilling across the floor in long, dark tendrils. I felt the air grow cold, sharp like the edge of a blade, and I heard the whisper again, "Open the door, and all will be revealed." My hands shook, every fiber of my being urging me to flee, yet a sick, morbid curiosity took root. What would happen if I opened it? What was this creature, this twisted mockery of life that claimed I'd summoned it? But before I could move, a loud bang echoed from the other side, rattling the walls and sending a jolt through my spine. I nearly dropped to my knees, clutching my head as the chanting grew louder, more urgent. I stumbled to the back door, ready to run, but as I reached for the handle, I saw a line of cats blocking my path, their eyes glowing with eerie intelligence, every movement synchronized as they herded me back toward the front. They wanted me to open it. They were guarding me, trapping me, making sure I wouldn't escape. Just then, the chanting stopped. Silence. The sudden absence of sound was almost worse, filling the room with a suffocating tension. I turned slowly, trembling, and saw that the figure was no longer outside the door. It was inside, standing in the middle of my living room, its hooded face turning toward me in a slow, deliberate motion. I opened my mouth to scream, but no sound escaped, my voice caught in the icy grip of terror. "Now you understand," it said, the shadows rippling around it as it extended one skeletal hand toward me. I tried to move, but the floor seemed to shift beneath my feet, pulling me closer to the creature as if drawn by an invisible force. Its bony fingers stretched out, inches from my face, and the cats watched in silence, their eyes reflecting the figure's darkness. I couldn't breathe. The figure's bony hand hovered just inches from my face, its coldness reaching me even without contact. I felt paralyzed, trapped by its gaze and the eerie silence of the house, broken only by the soft padding of the cats as they moved, forming a tight circle around us. They watched with an unnatural intensity, their eyes a sea of green fire, almost reverent. Somewhere in the back of my mind, I knew there was no escape. They had herded me to this moment. Why me?" I whispered, my voice small, helpless. The figure's mouth twisted, a cruel smile pulling at the edges of its shadowed face. "Because you can see us, hear us, you have the gift, but you ignored the call. Now we take what is ours." It spoke each word slowly, savoring them, its voice like a winter wind cutting through my skin. I tried to back away, but the floor seemed to pull me closer, my feet rooted in place. The cats, those silent witnesses, drew nearer as if closing in for some final ritual. I felt a wave of memories hit me, memories I hadn't thought of in years, the nights I'd felt eyes on me, the whispers I'd brushed off as dreams. Moments when I'd walked home in the dark, sensing something watching me from the shadows. All those stray cats that had begun gathering here months ago, their numbers growing, waiting for me to acknowledge them. I'd brushed it off, ignoring every sign, but now it was too late. "Open your heart," the figure rasped, its voice like grinding stones. Its hand reached toward my chest, and as its fingers brushed my skin, a sensation like icy needles stabbed through me. Darkness seeped into my bones like it was siphoning the very essence of me. I gasped, feeling my strength ebb away, leaving me cold and hollow. The figure's hand pressed harder, and in that moment, I felt my will slipping, as if something inside me was being torn away, taken. The cats closed in, their purrs vibrating through the room in a haunting symphony, rising and falling like a chant. One cat, a sleek black one with eyes like molten gold, stepped forward, watching with a solemn intensity. It seemed to nod, approving the figure's work, like some ancient judge giving its final verdict. The figure's grip tightened, pulling me deeper into its shadow, and I felt my consciousness fading, slipping into the darkness that swirled around me. "Wait," I managed, the words barely a whisper. "What happens to me?" The figure paused, its head tilting as if considering my question. For a moment, it seemed almost amused. "You will join us," it said, its voice soft but filled with a terrible finality. "And through you, others will see. The watching has only begun." I felt a shudder run through me as I realized that I would become one of them, another shadow, forever haunting those who could sense the darkness. The cats moved in a wave, pressing closer as the last bit of warmth drained from me. I could feel myself dissolving, my vision fading into shades of gray. The room dimmed, the boundaries of my world blurring as I became part of the darkness. My last sight was the cats, their eyes no longer judging, but welcoming, as if I were one of their own. Then there was nothing but shadows, an endless, silent waiting. The end. Subscribe for more true scary stories. Thanks for watching.